Welcome to episode 4 of Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons. My name is Dave Levine. I go by Kilmarock on the 11 O'Clock Comics forums and the Comic Geek Speak forums. I like to read comics and watch cartoons. I've been reading and watching off and on since the mid-70s. I don't read current comic books or watch the latest cartoons. On this episode, I'll be talking about the following: Captain America Annual 6, Top 10 list. This will be my favorite X-Men stories, and I've split this into 2 parts. Stuff I read, Fatale numbers 1 and 2, and stuff I watched, Batman Beyond, Ace in the Hole. Right now, I'm going to look back at a comic book I first read over 30 years ago and reread sometime in the last year or two, but not that recently. And that's Captain America Annual number 6, which is from 1982. Recently on Marvel Noise, episode 197, Steve and Justin looked back at J.M. DeMatteis' run on Captain America. He wrote most of the stories from issue 261 to 300, I believe. And one issue that they didn't talk about, but that he did write, was this issue right here, Annual number 6, in that same time frame. I had a subscription to Captain America, which began with issue 263. That would be, I guess, 2 issues into DeMatteis' run. And it ran through 276, I believe. Now, for some reason, I didn't get issue 264, which is the issue that shows the X-Men on the cover, and they did briefly talk about it in the episode. Now, I do have, and I've had since that time, this issue of Annual number 6. I can't remember if maybe they sent me this in place of issue 264. I'm not sure. But this issue is one that I look back on fondly. I think this is the issue that introduced me to the Invaders, because there's an appearance by the Invaders at the beginning of the issue. And it's also certainly the issue that introduced me to the notion that there was more than one person who had worn the red, white, and blue Captain America outfit. This issue looks back at Captain America. He confronts somebody. He has to confront his past, and he confronts who he is and some of the people who have played him, who have portrayed him. Now, I think the thing that strikes me the most about it is the fact that there was more than one Captain America, which was something that I wasn't aware of before I read it. The first Captain America, of course, was Steve Rogers, and he was followed by the second Captain America, who had originally been the Spirit of 76, who had also appeared in the Invaders. And then the third Captain America was somebody who had originally been the Patriot. And then there was a fourth Captain America, and I can't remember exactly who he was. But I always liked this issue, and even though it didn't live up to my memories of it when I went back to review it, to reread it a year or so ago, it did something for me. Because it introduced me to the whole notion that there could be more than one hero of the same name, and this notion of splitting the identity into more than one body, and that sometimes Captain America wasn't the great hero. I mean, the Captain America who fought during the 50s, I believe in here, is portrayed as somebody who was very loyal to the government, very anti-communist, and maybe not the best person in the world. But I really, this is one comic that I look back on fondly, and there's really something to it. For me, I'm not always a big fan of J.M. DeMatteis' work. I did enjoy some of the issues he wrote for the series, for Captain America. But this is one that I really like, and I kind of wish that they had reviewed it. They had looked back at it in episode 197 of Marvel Noise. The X-Men first appeared in 1963, which was 50 years ago this year. And there's a number of websites that have celebrated this fact. The Comic Geek Speak is doing a series of spotlight episodes on the X-Men. They've already done one on the X-Men in the Silver Age and another one on the X-Men in the Bronze Age, and I recommend both of them. I'm not sure the exact episode numbers, but I recommend you look for them. Over on Comics Should Be Good, they're doing a compilation. It's basically a survey of people, what they think are their 10 favorite X-Men episodes of all time. And so this got me thinking, and I started to put together a list of my own. I'm having a little trouble coming up with 50. I've read a lot of X-Men, but I'm not sure how many of them I would, X-Men issues, I'm not sure how many of them I would list as my favorite. But anyway, here's what I came up with so far. And I'm going to list them in chronological order because I'm not sure how I would sort them as far as which were my all-time, which is better than which. So first off, there's the story from X-Men 60 to 63. This is written by Roy Thomas, drawn by Neil Adams. And this is the story that introduced Sauron, the mutant who absorbs other people's powers and then turns into a giant kind of half-man, half-pterodactyl type beast. And he doesn't so much absorb their powers as he absorbs their energy. And in that storyline, first they encounter Sauron, then that Sauron, I think the Karl Lycos, who is the man who becomes Sauron, regains control, because when he's Sauron, he's kind of nutty and evil, and he goes to Antarctica to try and kill himself, but he winds up in the Savage Land, and the X-Men follow him there, and so Kazar shows up, and then it turns out Magneto's down there, and so that's one story. The next story would be, this was a story, X-Men versus Magneto is what I'm calling it. I'm not sure if it has a title. This is X-Men 111 to 113, and this is the story, the first issue. Magneto doesn't appear till the end, but this is the one that has the X-Men, they get hypnotized by Mesmero, and they're appearing in a circus. And then at the end of the issue, Magneto captures them and takes them to his base down in Antarctica, near the Savage Land. And he imprisons them all down there. Anyway, it's the third issue in this run, 113. I had a copy which was missing part of the cover that I picked up for, 50 cents or something like that at a yard sale, or I think it was actually a school fair where they had a book sale and they had a bunch of comic books, and I found it there. And I never had any of the other issues, and I didn't really get a chance to read them until a few years ago when I picked up the Uncanny X-Men Omnibus. But it's a really great story, I think, and I really, of course it's Byrne and Austin doing the art and Chris Claremont writing. And so, and it's in issue 113, you've got the X-Men fighting Magneto underneath Antarctica, underneath a volcano, and there's lava pouring down, and how they escape because Magneto's put them into these has them locked down in these things that reduce their body to a childlike state, so they can't do anything, even though their minds can think, they can't do anything that they couldn't do as a child. And it's really cool how they eventually escape, and the battle with Magneto is really cool. And following this story leads into a story in which most of them wind up in the Savage Land. But I've decided to leave that one off of my list. Next, we have the Dark Phoenix Saga. And the Dark Phoenix Saga, which, I don't know, there's different ways you could define the Dark Phoenix Saga. You could start it with issue 129, which is the first appearance of Kitty Pryde, which is probably where I would start it. And then you go from there to issue 130, and I think that's the way it is in the trade also, which is the first appearance of the Dazzler, the first appearance of the White Queen. And then, of course, they get captured by the Hellfire Club, and this story can sometimes be divided into two parts, because you've got the part that deals with the Hellfire Club, Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw, and their cohorts, because the X-Men, of course, captured by the Hellfire Club. And then there's the part which deals with the Shi'ar Empire coming in and trying to deal with the Dark Phoenix, with Jean Grey, who has become the Dark Phoenix or been possessed by the Dark Phoenix or the Phoenix Force, or I'm not sure how it's explained these days exactly, but I think it's something along those lines. And this is a really great, it's a really good story, and of course it's the last, well, it's not the last big story, but it's a great story, and it's drawn by, once again, Byrne and Austin, and it's got some classic scenes in it, including the one with Wolverine coming out of the sewers and his whole battle against the goons of the Hellfire Club, and then you also have the Cyclops dealing with having to, with these illusions while he's bolted down, battling Mastermind, well, the guy, Jason Weingard, and trying to reconnect with Jean Grey while she is under the control of the Hellfire Club. But it's a really great story. And then, of course, you get into that final issue, issue 137, which is the issue where the X-Men have been captured by the Shi'ar and are forced to battle for the Phoenix, for Jean Grey's life. And that's a really cool issue, the whole battle and what they do. And you've got some weird stuff in there, like when Wolverine encounters the Watcher, and of course it has a tragic ending, but I don't think that's a spoiler. But I won't go into any other details other than that. But Dark Phoenix Saga, excellent story. And so that's the first part of my list. And in the next segment, I will go over the second part of my list. Okay, here is the rest of my favorite X-Men stories. After the Dark Phoenix Saga, you have the Days of Future Past. This is X-Men's 141 and 142. And this is the storyline which is split between the present and the future. And it's a dystopic future, where the Sentinels have taken over and the X-Men have either been hunted down and killed or are living in captivity, with the exception of Wolverine. And Kitty Pryde, Catherine Pryde from the future, travels back in time and takes over the body of her younger self to convince the X-Men that they have to prevent the new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from killing Senator Kelly. And that saving Senator Kelly, because the death of Senator Kelly is what leads to the future that they live in. Next, I have X-Men 150, I, Magneto, and this is the first time that the X-Men have encountered Magneto since the earlier story I talked about in X-Men 111 and 113. And I don't remember a whole lot about this issue, but I remember enjoying it quite a bit. And it's got a great cover with Cyclops taking on Magneto and Storm cradling Kitty in her arms. But I need to reread it, but my recollection is this was a great issue. And this gets into the previous story, Days of Future Past, was written and drawn by Byrne and Austin, one of their last stories on this title. And this is Dave Cockrum, and this is solidly within his second run on the book. The next story that I really liked was the Brood Saga, which ran from X-Men 154 to 157, and then also 162 to 166. And this is the story which began with the X-Men being assaulted by aliens, first at the mansion, and then them traveling to outer space. There's some encounters with the Shi'ar, the Starjammers, a renegade group of aliens who are led by a human, Corsair, who is Cyclops' father, play a role in the story. Carol Danvers, who was previously Miss Marvel, plays a role, and she becomes through the course of the story, at some point in the course of the story, she becomes binary, and various members of the X-Men are taken over by the Brood. They have Brood-like implanted in them, and there's certainly this must have been influenced by Alien, the movie Alien, the Ridley Scott film. But this was a really good story, and it was a long-running story, ran for about 8 or 9 issues altogether. In between the break in the Brood Saga, there was an issue that dealt with young Professor X teaming up with Magneto to battle Hydra. That was X-Men 161, and I really enjoyed that one. And then X-Men 169 to 170 is the storyline that introduces the Morlocks. And the Morlocks were also mutants like the X-Men, except they lived under New York City, and they were for the most part repulsive. And they capture Kitty Pryde, and the X-Men go after her. Or actually, do they capture Angel? Because on that cover, I really need to reread some of these issues, but these are some of my favorite stories. Unfortunately, I no longer have the issues. I really should pick up the Marvel Masterworks that collect all these stories from, well, with the exception of 150, from 154 up. But the Morlock story in which Storm has to battle the Morlock's leader, Callisto, in a knife fight, and which kind of in part influences her punk look, her decision to go punk, because she ends up having to do violence in a way that she wasn't used to. And then the final story of my favorites would be X-Men Annual 3, which was written by Chris Claremont and drawn by George Perez. And this story involves Archon, who's a barbarian chieftain or emperor from another dimension, who I think had previously appeared in the Avengers, but I'm not certain on that. But I believe he captures Storm. He wants her to be his queen, and then of course the X-Men have to travel to this other dimension to rescue her. And but it's a beautiful looking book, and so that's my list. And my experience with X-Men doesn't go that long. When I was collecting it, I started around issue 150, and I ran through about issue 183, and I really haven't read much past 183. So that's where my list ends. If I'd read more, there may have been other stories on it, but that's it. I picked up the first 5 issues of Fatale by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips on a Comixology sale a while back, and I'm just getting around to reading it. I trust Ed Brubaker. I've enjoyed some of his other series, some of his other work on series like Sleeper, Daredevil, and Gotham Central. Sean Phillips, I'm a little less... I'm not quite as big a fan of Sean Phillips. I like his work, but I'm just not... I know some people sing high praises for him, and I don't feel quite the same way. But I really like what I see so far in the first 2 issues, which is all that I've read of Fatale up to this point. I guess my biggest hit against Sean Phillips would be his work on Sleeper. I felt like it lacked a consistent look. It felt like he was experimenting a lot throughout the series. Anyway, back to Fatale. This is a bit of a mystery, sort of a noir story, and it's slowly unfolding, so not everything is clear at this point, but I'm patient. I can wait. And as I said before, I trust Ed Brubaker, so I'm willing to give it the 5 issues, which I believe are the 5 that are collected in the first trade and that make up the first storyline, Death Becomes Me. From what I recall, Brubaker said in an interview that part of his goal with this series was to tell a story from the perspective of the femme fatale and to make her more sympathetic or more understandable. And this was probably a year or more ago, so I may not be remembering that correctly, but I think that's the gist of what he said. A little bit about the story itself so far. It starts in the present and then flashes back to the past. The character at the center of it all is the femme fatale, Josephine, who seems ageless because she seems the same age in both the 50s and in the present. In the past, she is at the moment hooked up with a cop, somebody she met during World War II. It's, I believe, in Europe. And his name is Walt Booker, and he's a cop. And he has something on her, but it's unclear at this point what that is. And she meets a reporter who's doing an investigation, and part of the investigation focuses on Booker. And the reporter's name is Hank Raines. Now, he's married, his wife is pregnant, but he very quickly gets caught up, very quickly gets attracted to Josephine, and Josephine is looking for somebody to help her get away from Walt. And so there's something about her. There are also scenes with occult ceremonies. There's a man with a snake-like tongue, kind of a forked tongue, by the name of Bishop. And she is trying to get away from Walt, and she's enlisting Hank. And there's something about her. Obviously, she seems ageless. There's something, and I think from the covers that she isn't quite human, but I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think she's just immortal, or there's something about her that's hidden still, that hasn't been revealed. So far, so good. I look forward to reading more. And if you like noir, this is probably a good story for you. But I can't render a judgment on the entire first trade because I've only read the first 2 chapters. But, like I said, So far, an excellent read. I like the look of the book. I like the feel of the story. I like the characters. It's a little confusing. It helps to read it more than once, I found. And that's my review. Batman Beyond, Ace in the Hole. This is the final episode of Season 2. I found it to be a very moving story, a very heartwarming story. It's actually two stories in one. It begins in, Batman Beyond's present, and then flashes back to a few, maybe several years before. And it did get a little confusing because it wasn't clear that the story was going to do that when it began. The story focuses on Ace, Bruce Wayne's dog. In the comic books, he was known as the Bat Hound, and I think even wore a mask. But in the animated series, he just is Bruce Wayne's dog, and for the most part, he hasn't really played a big role, or any sort of role. In fact, it's the first time I can remember him being anything other than more or less scenery. The story begins with Ace having a run-in with his former owner, who, although it isn't clear at first, was a man who trained dogs for dog fights. Ace escapes. Terry is out walking Ace. Ace sees this man, takes off, gets into a fight with the guy, then the guy escapes, and Terry is unable to get Ace back. Ace is on the streets by himself. So Terry goes back to Bruce Wayne. He talks to Bruce about it. They continue to look for him, but then the story flashes back, and you get two things. You get Ace's origin. You get to see him as a puppy, and then him as a trained fighter. You get to see his training. You get to see him escaping from his previous owner, and then you get to see Bruce Wayne's memories of meeting Ace for the first time. There isn't anything too distressing or violent shown on the screen, but there's certainly hints of the mistreatment of dogs. On the whole, I really like this episode, and I seem to like a lot of the episodes that don't involve supervillains, although there's certainly the use of some technology for various things, and I'll leave it that part at that. I don't want to give away too much. But on the whole, I, with the exception of a few villains, I really seem to prefer the episodes that have that don't involve supervillains. And the exceptions would be Mr. Freeze, occasionally the Joker's gang, and the Royal Flush gang. Anyhow, I think this is a very good episode, a really good episode. It's up there. It's not my favorite, but it's right up there. And it's a great way to end Season 2. And it's great to see a different character, Ace in this case, take the center stage.
That's it for this episode. If you made it this far, then thank you for listening. Comments can be left on the podcast page or my blog, readingforthetrade.blogspot.com, or you can email me at emaildavelevine@yahoo.com, or you can tweet at me at Kilmarok.